What's this video game? Shining Blade. Shining Blade. This is a PSP strategy RPG game set in the Shining universe. I know everybody here is the biggest Shining fan. Our community is full of Shining fans. And that I've played one and I've talked about Shining once. But what really caught my eye with this game is that it actually is using the Valkyria Chronicles engine from Valkyria Chronicles 2 on the PSP, or at least one of those Valkyria Chronicles for the exact timeline when these things came out. And it's also a game developed by MediaVision. So it's Chaos Rings, Wizard of Oz Beyond the Yellow Brick Road. Most people, Wild Arms. I've never played a Wild Arms game still, but that developer. We've been talking about them for a while for a lot of different reasons, and I really like their games. So I was really interested in what they did with the Shining series. I was really interested in what they were doing with the Valkyria Chronicles mechanics in a more JRPG style. And I think the ultimate result is you have a very totally okay RPG that probably doesn't have a big impact, but part of that may or may not be due to my experiences with Valkyria Chronicles, and then also the fan translation for this game has some real issues. So anyways, basically this game is about this young teenage boy named Rage who watches up on a beach with a sword, who is also a lady. And so it basically starts this kind of multi-nation thing where he's traveling from nation to nation, and he's trying to stop the Dark Dragon, which in the Shining world, Dark Dragon is basically the Dark Falls or the Ganondorf or Bowser of the Shining universe, right? The big bad guy that's kind of, as far as I can tell, the same between all the games. I'm not a Shining expert, just to say. And so a lot of this game as a strategy RPG is you going around and recruiting new characters, and so you have a pretty large cast of characters, and this is one of those very much character-oriented kind of JRPG style games with romance elements and having a more, I've never really found the word for it, but it is very much a game where they're going to be selling figures and stuff of all these characters and stuff, right? They really want you to attach to these characters. So it's a pretty large cast, primarily women. There's also some animal dudes and a few human men there, here and there. But the characters are really the focus. The core narrative is, pretty straightforward in the same way that, a Link defeating Ganondorf would be pretty straightforward. We are here to defeat Dark Dragon, and we are going to do whatever we can to do that. And there's little interesting tidbits here and there along the way, but the core story is defeating Dark Dragon. So, one thing I was not aware of before playing this game is this is technically a crossover game. It features a large variety of characters from other Shining games, including Shining Tears, Shining Hearts, Shining Winds, and a lot of these games have not been localized in English, I will say. So, there's a good chance you don't really know the lore of what's going on here. And I do feel like there are times that this game doesn't really do a great job of accommodating the player. It has times where they'll be oh my God, a character is here. And they show the character and everybody's shocked. And it's I have no idea who this person is. Thankfully, there are animes for all those series, so if you want to watch those, you can. I did watch Shining Hearts, and I get the feeling that Shining Hearts, the anime, may not actually be in the same place of the lore as Shining Hearts, the game, despite, I think, being based on the same story. So, Shining experts, please correct me if I'm wrong. But, it's a little challenging to get into. But overall, at the end of the day, what this game is based around is character relationships. Each character has a key issue, and what you do as you go through the game is you basically battle alongside them, which builds relationships, and you unlock new cutscenes with those characters, and you earn character-specific quests. And so it's all about kind of building a closer bond to each character in the game, and some of those are more romantic bonds as well. And part of this all plays into the battles, similar to how Valkyria Chronicles has character stories. Each character has different traits and things like that kind of impact their performance on the battlefield. So there's usually I think 4 or 5 of them, and so it can be things I'm thinking of Valkyria Chronicles versions here because maybe it didn't really play a big role in this game, but in Valkyria Chronicles every time a character has allergies, so they go sit in tall grass, their accuracy will be reduced because they're dealing with allergies and things like that. And this game has a thing with like, oh, these characters are brother and sister, but they hate each other. So when they're near each other in the battlefield and things like that, they'll get like a stat debuff and things like that. So this game has a very similar system in place here. And then as you kind of go through those character stories, a lot of those character traits change from negative to positive, usually the opposite of what it was. So brother and sister previously hate each other, now they get buffs when they're near each other, kind of thing. So there's a lot of Valkyria Chronicles blood in this game. You know, it's these kind of large, or maybe I shouldn't say large, it's a PSP game. There are these maps, real-time maps, that you take turns moving around. You pick a character, you run around the level, and they move in real time, and enemies will kind of like crossfire and shoot at you. I think every enemy in the game has a projectile typically. Not all your characters have projectiles. So it has like a very different kind of feel to it, because a lot of Valkyria Chronicles is kind of about like denying space from other characters. And that depends a lot on their rank, or their class and things like that, and their range and things like this. This game doesn't really have a lot of that. Either the range is a very specific range, or the character doesn't have a range at all, so they don't really respond to an enemy passing in front of them in real time. So I think a lot of that novelty is kind of lost here. So I think what really they're kind of banking on in terms of this more like moving around and positioning characters kind of system is positioning for AoE attacks or dodging AoE attacks. Also, there are larger enemies in the games have parts and things like that can be broken on characters. There's also a co-op system where you can basically pair up with other characters. And so depending on how close those characters are to the enemies, you might be able to have the character attack twice in a single action. And that co-op thing also does the whole thing of like, oh, if it's a tank character who moves slowly across the stage, then, you know, having somebody who's a faster character be able to co-op with them will make them, you can move across the stage a lot easier because they're basically siphoning off the other characters or latching on to the other character who has higher movement speed kind of thing. So I think one problem I have with games like this a lot of times is that the pacing of them is a little rough. Primarily in the sense of, because a lot of the characters are melee focused, there's a lot of time it takes just to kind of like get to where you need to go. The maps aren't that big, but I feel like you're often wasting a turn just trying to like get over to the enemies. Depends on the size of the map. And so it can feel pretty slow, but I feel like this is a problem with a lot of these kind of games that you have these like real-time movement things. I feel like the Neptunia series has a similar system. I'm thinking a lot of like Adian Chronicles on the 64 right now for some reason, but you know, it can be a little slow. But I think in the other types of games I've seen like this, it's pretty similar. But it's a lot more, traditional RPG than like what Valkyria Chronicles is for sure. And I think as long as you're okay with that, where you're very much just kind of building a character that is either melee focused or magic focused or tanky kind of things, this game kind of lets you do that here. It maybe goes a little too far. There are a lot of different kind of like equipment. Well, there's not a lot much equipment, but like there's a lot of different ways you can customize a character, and a lot of times it feels kind of meaningless, I will say. It's, at least in terms of when you're playing the game in a more traditional sense of like going through the story and things like that. A lot of times these characters, they have a class, and that class really kind of defines, you know, how they work. And I think those classes are unique enough that they kind of stand on their own, but then you can kind of like go much deeper and be like, oh, I want a character with like higher magic defense, or I want a character with like a higher speed stat, or I want a character who like paralyzes on hit. And again, it's all like really cool customization and things like that, but it feels kind of unnecessary for the complexity of what the game challenges you. I kind of find this to be a problem with media vision games in general, where they'll build a lot of systems and they don't really know how to like integrate those into the gameplay itself. So as you get a lot of systems on the back end that kind of help you, or that kind of give you a lot of freedom in how to do things, but at the end of the day, like there's not really a lot of gameplay to kind of use it against. So one problem this game has, I will say, is being a fan translation. There are some issues, primarily in that it is a partial human and partial machine translation. As far as I understand, like a certain point up to the game, the story is translated, But everything else, from when it comes to like the side text, menu text, and things like that, it's machine translated. Especially later story stuff as well also gets machine translated. If you've never played a machine translated game before, it's pretty good at helping you understand what's going on. Just a lot of the dialogue is unnatural. A lot of the dialogue is inappropriate for the game. There's a lot of really crude language in this game as well, in terms of just like the translation, like clearly stuff that's not supposed to be what is being said. But it's a little bit more crude than I have ever really seen for a machine translation before. Anyways, but point being, it's just kind of not great. So, if you want to understand the core narrative, what's going on, what these characters are about and things like that, you'll get that. You just won't get the flair that comes with like, building a character around a particular style or around a particular like character archetype, things like that. You're going to have to kind of fill in those blanks yourself based off any voice acting, any kind of like, there's not a lot of animation in this game. There are little cutscenes and things like that, but there's just not a lot going on with that kind of stuff. So, the biggest problem though, I will say, is that when you are trying to like romance characters and stuff, there's like these little dialogue trees that pop up, and usually it's like, you have to give a response to like a very out of context statement. And I don't know how hard this was in the original Japanese, but here, sometimes I feel like the statements are just not very clear of like what's trying to be said. I am going to choose to blame the machine translation part of this on here. And it's not really a huge deal because you do build relationship with characters through battle and things like that, but it is a little frustrating when you are trying to, build a particular relationship with a particular character and you are wanting to like do it as fast as possible, but you can't get all the relationship points because you can't understand what's being said and how to respond, even though technically it's in front of you in English. In general, this game it can be very grindy when it comes to relationships. It's also very unclear about what the requirements are for certain relationships and also what is available for you in each relationship, because there's probably like 20 to 25 characters, if not more. And not all of them are mainline dateable characters. And so some characters have special endings. Some of them don't, or at least as far as I can tell, they don't. And so it's hard to tell when a character's story arc is done, what character needs more, unless they have a very conclusive ending, which actually sends you to credits. And you can spend a lot of time grinding a character, hoping that you're going to get more story out of the character, only to realize there's no more story out of that character. But it's really hard to tell. Especially in the post game, you'll spend a lot of time just kind of grinding a lot of the same missions to do that. I will say that if you want to see all the mainline story, when you get into the post game, if you finish every quest and every free battle, there is a bonus dungeon, and that really connects it to the larger Shining lore. I don't have a lot of context for what that larger lore means, but I will say on the surface level, it felt a little frivolous, so I don't really know how much you're going to really get out of like Shining Blade if you're a big Shining fan, but I imagine at this point, if you're a big Shining fan, you are already aware of the contents of Shining Blade. So either way, I think it's a really solid RPG as a whole. I don't regret playing it. I do feel like I kind of was wanting a little bit more out of it just from the fact that I do have this association with MediaVision and also the Valkyria Chronicles franchise that I really like. It didn't quite deliver on that, but I think it is like a totally solid, okay strategy RPG on its own. And if you can get over the machine translation, I think the character relationships here are pretty solid. But if you've never played a Shining game before and you want to try to give yourself like the best chance of the Shining game, I have only played two. Keep in mind, this game and Shining Resonance, but I would vote play Shining Resonance over it. It's a different style of game. It's more like an action RPG kind of thing. But I think that just the fact it has an official translation that's like really well done overall, I think alone kind of gives it a leg up over Shining Blade in that regard.